Hey, welcome to the 272nd episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patrons Tim Morrill, Garen Chadwick, and Morgan Rout. I'm Matt Enlow.
And I'm Oren Kaplan, and today we have Myron Kerstein on the podcast. He is an editor that has edited so many amazing things, most notably right now In the Heights, a movie that's already out, came out on HBO and is probably in theaters right now and smashing records for post-pandemic films. It's Lin-Manuel Miranda's play come to life, directed by John Chu, the director of Step Up and Crazy Rich Asians and another amazing dance movie that I can't think of right now. But yeah.
The League of Extraordinary Dancers.
Yeah.
And most importantly to me, Gwai Lo, the USC thesis film that I PA'd on. As a wee freshman. Very exciting.
Very exciting. Myron himself has edited some amazing things. He did Garden State. Have you seen that movie? Heard of it? Zach Braff?
Sure, yeah.
Raising Victor Vargas, one of the early indie breakout films. He did The Dukes of Hazzard. He did Little Fockers. He did Up All Night, House of Lies, Girls, Divorce. He did the pilot for that on HBO.
Yeah, and
Good
incredible.
Trouble.
So many great things. He's a real treat to talk to. You know, I think he's a very instinctual editor, which is, I think, a real treat. You know, I think he has a lot of great philosophies, but also understands that, you know, editing comes from the gut. So it's a really good conversation. I want to say, if you want to see In the Heights, if you don't know the story, if you haven't heard the soundtrack, you know, this would be a good one. We talk specifically about certain numbers and all of that. So it's helpful to have a little bit of background knowledge. It's not essential, but if you're thinking about watching In the Heights, maybe go ahead and do it. Pull over, download a BitTorrent, or drive to your nearest movie theater, watch In the Heights, and then come back to us. Worthwhile. And also there is a spoiler warning. We have a relatively meaty spoiler in this episode. So
we haven't seen the movie yet, but we know one thing has been spoiled.
Yeah, so a heads up there. Most of it is spoiler free, but there is one kind of, I assume, having not seen the piece, relatively
it's a
meaningful.
consequential spoiler.
Yeah, exactly. So
spoilers aside, it was a really fun conversation. It's great to hear how even a movie that big, based on an existing stage show that was a smash hit on its own accord, was still a movie that had to be rearranged in post, reworked, re-edited, especially with COVID. That bought them actually a lot of time to go back into the film and figure out exactly what worked and what didn't. And Myron tells us a lot about that. And we also just talk about editing music in general and choosing coverage and all that geeky stuff that I love to talk about, like when to make a cut and what should you cut to. The obvious things that make all the difference in the pacing and the emotion of a film.
When Oren and I were talking about this episode in particular, you know, kind of prepping for it, we realized that oftentimes we tend to, you know, put people into two different buckets. We'll be like, okay, we're going to talk to this person about the business, and then some people we're going to talk to about the craft. And it's been a minute since we've done a craft episode, and it was so fun. It was really refreshing to just kind of dig in on what makes something good and not worry about how they got their first job or any of that stuff. So if you want to get nerdy about just the act of making specifically musicals, but editing in general, if you want to just become a better editor, a better filmmaker, this episode is specifically about that. So it was genuinely so fun to talk to Myron.
Yeah. Before we get to our Patreon plug, I did want to say something kind of funny. I got an email today from one of our listeners who had contacted me about doing some Blender work because he said he heard on the podcast that I have some free time and I'm not busy. He's like, I know you're taking care of that kid, but maybe you can have some time to do some 3D work. So I love it when people from the podcast contact me. I've actually done quite a few jobs with podcast guests or people I've just met through the podcast. I do have some shoots coming up. So, you know, sometimes what you hear about our availability and what's happening the second that we are recording the episode don't exactly track to when the episode come out, but I did. It was an interesting piece of information to know that I didn't even remember that I told people I had some free time.
Yeah, you know, it's also something where we don't want to brag about what work we're doing, and we don't have any takeaways from it yet. You know, so after a week or two of the job that you've processed things that you can kind of talk about it in a more cogent way. And we also focus on the trials and tribulations of being a filmmaker. So we're not like, oh man, getting jobs is so easy. I just am working all the time. Life is crazy. Isn't a super interesting part of our lives. But I think it does result in listeners thinking that we are more hard up for work than we actually are. Which is a funny side effect of everything.
And I do try to focus a lot on our downtime or us like losing jobs and things. Because I want, you know, people to know that it's No matter where you are in your career, even Myron, who, edited these like epic films, talked about how during COVID for 6 months, he didn't have any work. And he was like, should I leave the business? Knowing that you're in that same company, that 90% of what we do is stress out, I think is helpful for people. And it's not something you would get from a press junket. And the other thing, I think you already mentioned it, but sometimes we're working on projects and they're not always going great. And we are meeting a lot of new people, and some of them might realize we have a podcast, and it's not great if they listen to the podcast and you're talking about them or their project.
Yeah. One time I was on this job, and this producer really was so stupid. They said these dumb things.
Yeah, but I will say, one of the projects I'm working on right now, something interesting did happen, and I did want to talk about it on the bigger scope. I told you about it the other day, and I will wait till next episode or maybe the episode after that to mention it.
A teaser.
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting thing about like emotions and feedback and how your work is seen by the world. And I think it could be a fun lesson.
We are actively mining our careers for lessons for the podcast in a pretty real way. So anyway,
before we talk to Myron, I'd love to remind people that we have a Patreon. If you hear a name at the beginning of an episode, that usually is one of our patrons. I'm assuming everyone else just hits the fast forward 30 seconds twice when we start talking about the Patreon here, but stop doing that. We say something more interesting also, every time we plug the Patreon.
That assumes that we are much more consistent in terms of timing than we are. There's no way.
I mean, that's what I do when I listen to podcasts. It's like, on the daily, Michael Barbara's like, hey, you'll hear more right when we get back. And I hit forward 3 times on the 30 seconds and then backwards
and
15 seconds.
15.
Yeah, and it's usually around right. But sometimes I find that I'm fast forwarding and rewinding longer than it would have been to just listen to the ad.
Dear listeners, imagine if you missed out on this level of banter. The quality of this banter is certainly worth your time, and it would be a disgrace to have missed out on it, or at least a huge loss. So do yourself a favor and listen to the entire Patreon plug. Patreon.com/JustShootItPod. It's a place where you can throw us $1 or $2. If you're really a diehard fan, or you're worried about getting sunburnt, or just like head coverings, for $10 a month, you can get a Just Shoot It hat.
Even if it's just 1 month, we'll give you that hat.
Yeah. Do us a favor. Stick around for 2 months. That would be ideal for us.
That will cover the cost of the hat.
Yeah. Then we are not losing money on the hat. But either way, it's okay. And stay subscribed. It's really helpful. We are doing, again, more things to spend money on the show. So every little bit helps and keeps us going, and goes into the pockets of our dear editor, Sarah, Derek, our social media maestro, and all of the overhead, the surprisingly high amount of overhead that a show like this has. Yeah,
and even some Just Shoot It ads that we're putting around the internet. Check them out. Go to our Instagram, Just Shoot It Pod, Instagram.com/JustShootItPod if you want to see some little Just Shoot It videos we're making. So that's it. Now, on with the show. Okay, we are here with Myron Kerstein. How's it going? Congratulations on probably the #1 movie in the box office this weekend.
Yeah, we'll see. It's very exciting, and it feels like the start of summer. So to be one of those films that actually makes you feel like you might have something big or something what you would go to when you were a kid, Giddy doesn't even say half of it.
It's pretty exciting. It's also one of those movies where immediately you're like, oh, they're gonna play this like in outdoor screenings every summer from now on. You know what I mean? That's just going to be part of the repertoire.
Right, as long as COVID keeps going. 40 years down the road.
If we could just hope for that. No, that's horrible. It's the worst possible joke.
I did see on Fandango that, like, I'm sure this is wrong. It was just a headline. It said that 96% of people are going back to the theater for the first time to watch In the Heights. It was like a survey they did last week. Like, what's the first movie you're going to see back in the theater? And it was In the Heights.
Sorry, Fast 9.
Yeah, that's right. Watch your back. Watch your back, Fast. Couple weeks, I think. Couple weeks.
Yeah.
We have a little breathing room, but it's that's what I've heard too. I heard that a lot of people are, if they're going to go return to the theaters, if they're going to go do it with this film, and that's exciting as well. And I know friends who, I'm in New York right now, and I know friends in LA saying they can't get a ticket, this weekend. And I know a lot of friends of friends who've actually bought out theaters. Of course, some of these theaters are just 30% capacity, but I think we're going to be on over 4,000 screens this weekend. So
I've been on arclight.com all day trying to get tickets, and
are you
I
serious?
can't get any.
No, you're not serious.
ArcLight
ArcLight that's
Oh,
it closed
shit,
down.
yeah.
That's
You're like,
salt in the
I
wound
can't even
show.
get on the site. The site must have crashed.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I was watching
genuinely very sad, actually.
my current favorite show on HBO, Hacks, that I keep talking about, last night, and I saw that In the Heights, I could watch it on HBO, and I was like, it was like 11 p.m. I was like, babe, we gotta watch this movie right now because we're gonna talk to the editor tomorrow, and it only is gonna be on HBO till June 11th, which is tomorrow. Do you know about this, Myron?
No, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, I think they're stopping the streaming for the
That's
theatrical.
interesting. They did that with Judas and the Black Messiah.
Really?
Yeah. It was available on HBO for a minute, and then it was only theatrical, and then so it was a little tricky.
Yeah, I have to see what's going on with that. I assume that maybe because I know that there was going to be they kept moving the date, and they would move it up first they moved it back a whole year, but then they moved it up a week, and then they moved it up a week and a day, and so maybe there was just giving a little window for the theatrical or something. But
right. Well, when did you finish cutting it? Did you finish a year ago?
Yes, I finished the summer of what year is this? The summer of 2020. Yeah.
Last year.
So you were cutting during the pandemic, during lockdown. Basically.
Well, I was cutting. I cut a majority of the film the last half of 2019, and then we through February of 2020, and then we were about to mix, and then they shut us down. And then, ironically enough, around that time, I left. Before they shut us down, I left to go actually direct something for another TV show that I had cut on. And then that got shut down. And then John Chu called me up and said, this was like 6 months later, and said, hey, I'd like to do a few more things on the movie. Do you want to set up in your home? And that's what I did. So then I started cutting again for a couple more months. And then things started opening up just a tad, just to allow us to do the final mix. So it was an extended hiatus, I guess. And then
it would be tempting if you know that your big budget movie got pushed a year, right? Why not kind of go back in and futz with things a little bit? You sat with the edit for a long time. All of the effects are close to complete. You're really seeing a whole picture. I'm sure there were a few things you wanted to nudge one way or the other or scoot around.
100%. And in fact, it's kind of the thing you wish with almost every film you work on, because you have a little time to reflect on what you've done. And we actually took scenes out of the movie and put back a couple scenes. And then the music department was so behind in February because, of course, they were meticulous. I had, all the guys from the original stage production, Alex Lacamoire and Bill Sherman. And they wanted to do work on the music side, and I was literally meticulously slipping sync with my music editors, and which was taking me really months on its own just to do that type of work. And so that extra time, and then coming back to it, I actually think it made it a much better movie than it was back in February.
Well, the other crazy thing that happened after you finished cutting this movie is that Hamilton came out on Disney Plus. Right? Because that's the first Lin-Manuel Miranda thing that's on TV or on screen, right? That's filmed. And probably that coming out changes the entire release plan for this movie, right? It's how hyped are people now?
Yeah, and there was people that had heard of Hamilton, but either couldn't afford it or, if they were asleep.
Just never saw it. Yeah.
never heard of it. But then they're like, oh, it's on Disney Plus. I might as well watch it. And they're like, oh, wow. Everyone wakes up to, Lin's The Force of Nature of Lin. And then, it's the best setup in the world for this film.
And also just the appetite for this type of movie. There's not a ton of, this is a proper Hollywood film, It's fun, it's a musical, it's bright, it's flashy, it's joyous, and Hollywood doesn't make a ton of those movies anymore, and I like all sorts of different types of movies, but it's really wonderful to see, a musical on the big screen. I think that people are really hungry for that energy.
Well, I like to say that my currency and John's currency is love and joy and empathy, And, I think we did a little of that on Crazy Rich Asians. And I think that, I think I'm okay in being in that business, and to do it in this scale is, it's what you dream of. It's like, okay, I'm going to make something that is, has a positive message, also makes movie stars out of people who you may never have considered to be a movie star. They don't look necessarily like what I'm used to. They don't look like Brad Pitt. They look like, the guy down the block. And yeah, I'm very happy that this is coming out right now in this, as a big Hollywood spectacle.
Yeah. Well, we really want to jump into the craft, but my last question about just the release of this film beforehand is, I mean, you edited so many amazing things. Like we were, geeking out, like Raising Victor Vargas and Garden State, the pilot for Divorce and all these episodes of Girls. And like you mentioned, Crazy Rich Asians, like you've done all these things and you finished editing this movie a long time ago. Do you still get excited? Like, is this still like a big deal when a movie like this comes out for you, when you've had so many great movies come out?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm still like a kid, like getting into the business for the first time with every project. I look at it like with bright eyes and bushy tail. Like I walk onto a set and I'm like, I can't believe I get to walk on the set. It's so amazing. And to be honest with you, like, I knew that this musical was going to be really fun to cut, but I didn't realize how emotional of an experience it was going to be. I was literally crying daily, watching dailies for this movie. And it'd be literally people singing and dancing across a park. And, my family just makes fun of me. Like, look, he's crying again. But that's my reaction. And I just feel,
guys.
I just feel, it's corny to say, but I just feel alive. And to make films that make you feel alive, man, if I can do that just the rest of my life, like, no, I'm not jaded or cynical. I feel so fortunate to work on so many great things, but every one of those things just made me a better editor and better artist. And, I just want to keep getting better, and so fortunate, I wasn't working for 6 months during the pandemic. So, my bank account was going down. I was like, oh my God, I think do we have to sell the house, or like, seriously? But then, somebody called and said, hey, John called and said, hey, you want to, start cutting again? And I was like, oh yes, I want to start cutting again. Not just to, make a paycheck, but also just to like have that creative output. So,
yeah. How crazy is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the secret sauce that dailies can make a grown man cry? Like, what do you think it is? What are the ingredients that are in those shots that you're saying that make you so emotional?
Well, I think Lin in particular, his lyrics are like I joked with him that I feel like they're like a tear factory, because I just feel like they portray so much empathy in the storytelling. And I don't know, I can, the same way with Hamilton, I just connect to his lyrics, which is basically our dialogue, just in a really deep way. And I've been actually trying to analyze why why do I connect to it so deeply? And I think it's just that once it starts washing over you, you just really feel it. But I also think that watching people who haven't been represented in this way, this community hasn't been represented this way, the stakes are real.
Yeah, no, it feels like it's coming from a real place. It's not something someone made up and wrote down on a screenplay.
And it's ironic because they're singing and dancing. That's their scenes, and that's so, like, in theory that seems so detached and like, is it just a pop song? Like, no, these are scenes. And I don't know, there was just something about it. Every single day I would send videos to Alice Brooks, the cinematographer, and John Chu, of me crying. and they're like, why are you crying again? I don't know. But that was also the thing that I was just like, I have to remember that feeling. I have to remember. Right. Actually,
the
John,
feeling for the first time of experiencing the film, even in this raw state, you're trying to give to the audience, right?
Totally, because and making note of it, or making selects based on it, and say that I connected to this moment. I don't know why, but I connected to this moment, and I'm going to put that in a box, and I'm going to use it. and
or
one
a
of the
bin.
things.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's kind of like the Walter. Is that the Walter Murch thing? Like kind of in
Sort
his
of.
book.
Yeah.
Watch everything and just like what's your gut reaction the first
your
time you
eye
see
was
it?
blinking so much that you started to cry. Right?
It was. I was blinking. I literally do the same thing. I literally sit back and I don't even use locators, which is basically a way of like indicating something on a keyboard of
like a marker.
Marker. And I just literally watch like the footage like from top to bottom, and I just take notes, usually in a database or on even just a notepad if I don't have my computer in front of me, and I just say, cried for during this time code to the or this lyric to this lyric on take 20 a camera, so on and so forth. But one of the things that when I first started on the film, John invited me up to his apartment. It was like probably a couple of days before they started production. And he said, let me show you like the opening number, but it's rehearsal footage cut to like animatics. So it's like a combination of storyboards and rehearsal footage to like a real like rough draft of the song. And I watched it and I just started crying there too. And it was just like, it's funny because, we did the table.
Like we were going to fire him, but we just feel so bad at this point. Let's just keep him on the project.
It's like, he had to pull out the tears right there. And he was saying, a couple of days ago, they had done the table read, with all the actors and everyone was weeping during there. And he's like, we got to remember that feeling. Like that is our beacon. And I was just like, absolutely. Like everything else, like I just have to remember how I'm just connecting to things just in a very natural way, like as an audience member, and I have to make note. And that was literally going to be the building blocks for everything in the entire movie. How do I connect to something?
I love that. I'm curious because you'd mentioned, using rehearsal footage and previous footage and the storyboards, the dailies that you're seeing, right? A lot of them are still pretty raw and pretty rough, right? Certainly, like you have audio that's synced to it that, feels of a level of production quality, but there's, a lot of spectacle in this movie. I assume there are a lot of effects, some of which are obvious. Sometimes they're dancing on the side of a building, and that's probably all green screen, right? But I imagine there's also a lot of stuff that's a little less obvious where you're adding in different background elements or you're comping in additional performances or background dancers, things like that. I'm curious about the timeline for when things get slotted in for you, right, from the raw footage all the way through, and how those decisions are affected. Right? You've got that emotional feeling, right? But sometimes the dailies are literally on a green screen, right? So are you seeing it that raw?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. Like when the sun goes down, it was basically 80% green screen, except that they're dancing on the side of a wall. So a wall that's actually there's an engineering feat that it's actually going down. It's moving down as the camera is moving, so you can't tell when basically the sky begins and ends. And it's very. I'm still trying to. How they did it.
Yeah, I would love to see some BTS. There's got to be BTS footage of that somewhere.
Oh yeah, it'll start coming out soon. It'll start coming out soon. But but on that type of stuff, I was, again, we're judging on the performance and the choreography. A lot of the choreography, what were they doing correctly? Was the basis of like how we were just really cutting that number together. And there was a debate about how much should we editorialize that number? Should we just let the camera do the work, and I could pull way back. Like it's not like 96,000 where it's there's some a lot of edits in it, versus this is like maybe there's a dozen in the entire musical sequence. But I just have to imagine what it's going to look like, and of course on a big number like that, it was important for me to cut that first as quickly as possible, because we knew it was going to take 6 months to get that right from a VFX standpoint. So we really didn't have rough comps in there for like months after we had made the first pass, versus something like The Beach, which was shot in the DR, which was shot in Long Island. I could cut that and sort of get into the moments based on performance, and then we could put in the palm trees at the back and the beautiful sky and water and what have you.
Can I ask you on VFX specifically, when you're editing that, as someone that does VFX sometimes, I have noticed that editors, especially newer editors, tend to cut the green screen sequences too fast because they're not thinking about that all this visual information that's coming to you. They're like, oh, here's a person dancing, you know? But really, there's buildings, there's sun, there's birds, there's all this stuff that is much harder to process. And so, you know, people tend to cut green screen footage a lot faster. They give it to the VFX artist. They're starting to put in plates, and you're like, this is just, you can't, you know, it's too fast. Is that something that you ever go through, or is that, do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah. And I think that's a good example of like, this is, you know, maybe at first we thought that there would be more edits in the number. And then we realized that, you know, the spectacle of it was going to hold our attention, and we didn't really need to. And we also didn't need to do it to like enhance the choreography. Like it was very, you know, it could be really lyrical with that number. It's sort of a similar, like I cut this 3D concert movie, Glee 3D concert movie, and it was like, you just couldn't like cut that quickly because you were in 3D. And it's sort of the same thing. Like your eyes would just kind of go crazy. And also, like I tend to try not to just, it's hard to look at this film and say, really? You know, when you see like a musical number like The Club, where there's so many edits, there's so much going on, but I tend to try not to cut just to make an edit, like just to make you excited. Like there's reasons in which I try to do everything. And so I definitely try to pull back, especially when you have big, plenty of other things to look at.
Yeah. Going back to your point about performance, I think it's interesting to think about musicals because I think as filmmakers, you're very used to judging the performance of an actor in terms of, does it feel authentic? Did it move me? All of that stuff. But choreography is part of that performance as well. And I've done a tiny bit of musical stuff, and I feel like I would show rough cuts to producers and things like that, and like the dance experts in the room would be like, oh, well, this take you can't use because they're like, that dancer in the back is off time or something like that, you know. And obviously you're dealing with world-class dancers, so that's probably less of an issue, but you still do have to judge off of not just the acting but also the dancing. How did you approach that? How did you prepare for that? What does it take to know good dancing from bad?
That's a good question. I don't know if I really know what the difference between good dancing and bad, but I do know is when something like feels emotional to me. Like if somebody's doing something and they're dancing their ass off, and I'm just like, holy shit, I just feel this. Like there's moments in like Carnival there's a dancer like slipping up in the middle of the crowd, but that doesn't matter because I'm feeling the energy of the mass together. That being said, you know, there's definitely moments where, you know, I'm constantly just trying to finesse, you know, dance moves to, again, flow into each other. Like I was using the Walter Murch approach again. Like I just wanted things to be able to motivate to the next cut all the time. Like I'm just constantly looking for something, anything where it's just a hand move, or, you know, somebody, you know, spinning around and then, you know, catching that movement on the next cut. I was always just trying my best to motivate everything. And then we'd also bring in somebody like Chris Scott, who is a choreographer, and say, where did we fuck up? Like, tell me like if we're really off here on the choreography. We're like, are they doing it correctly? Is there a better take? And he could like, I wouldn't say that it was that much, but there was probably like a couple dozen places where he was saying, you know, hey, do you have a better take, or can you nudge us a little bit to help them out, or, you know, but there wasn't a lot.
So this is kind of going back to what we were talking about before and this, but and it's an editing 101 question, but something that I run into all the time, which is when you're shooting a musical, it's kind of like shooting stunts and shooting action, right? You're seeing 5 amazing angles on the same dance move, right? And you said you'll watch a take and you'll write down, oh, this is where I felt emotional. I cried when this happened. What happens when you watch, you know, 5 different angles and you cried in every single angle or in 3 of the angles? My very bad habit is I try to cut from the wide to the close and try to capture both of those. And a lot of times it ends up dividing them and, you know, those moments in 2 instead of having them land. How do you gauge, you know, what angle to use and how to recreate that feeling while having to obviously throw away a version of that feeling from a different angle. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Look, my mantra is don't cut unless you have to. So I tend to, if I can hold on something like, let's say like Usnavi in the reflection window at the bodega I had plenty of coverage during that whole reflection, but there was a design to it in which they had an emotional impact to just hold on that window. But I had 3 cameras going on that moment, but I'll be honest with you, it's just playing with it and experimentation where you're just like, I got this feeling when I was watching this angle, and I've got that feeling that's, you do have B or C cameras maybe shooting the same thing. What's the choice? But I generally gravitate, to the wider angles if I can, there's more information there. But if I need to do a flourish and a close-up and that heightens, that thing, and Pacencia Fe, there's this moment where Bola Claudia is getting surrounded by all the dancers in one of the train cars. And John originally wanted it to just play more of a wider. It's like, no, I really like that moment where they're like banging on the window behind her. And because that has an emotional impact as well. I could just sit in the wide and let all those dancers and see that choreography in the wide, but here it's like I can get a little bit of flourish, I get a little shock, I get a little goosebumpy when I did it, and you just kind of keep letting that stuff be your guide. And then when you screen for an audience, you're like, no, I was wrong, or I was right, or you just keep trying to gauge, experimenting between the way you're cutting a scene.
Yeah, I love that so much, and it didn't make me. It occurred to me that the nature of shooting a studio film with a person like John is that you kind of have an interesting challenge coverage-wise, because he's such an intentional filmmaker. If you only had one camera for every single scene, everything would still turn out great, right? It might take a little bit longer, but like he knows where he wants the camera to be on most cuts, right? On most moments. And then B and C or D camera, it makes sense to have them because, there's only so many times, there's only so much time in the day, and only so many times you can have your dancers go at full steam on a scene before you're just burning people out. So it makes sense to just as a backup plan. Did you find oftentimes that you were sticking with his initial instinct and vision, or were you mixing and matching a little bit more? How much were you inventing versus how much was part of the blueprint?
And you're speaking about dance numbers specifically, right?
Specifically, yeah. But I guess it kind of applies to everything, right? I guess, yeah.
I don't download his brain too much before I start cutting initially, because I want to put my own take on it. And because he now trusts me, now that I've made one film before and we've cut a couple pilots together, there's a shorthand and trust that he knows that I'm going to sift through everything. I'm going to be very thorough and watch it, but I'm also going to really try to have my own take about how to cut a scene. And, every once in a while I'll get it wrong, or like that reflection shot where he's just like, no, don't cut that one up, because you look at it and you're just like, well, the visual effect isn't in there yet. You don't really, it would have been helpful to talk to him before that, before I started cutting that scene. But I tend to just love the freedom of approaching the footage like I don't even have a director. That somebody just dumped all this found footage in my lap and said, make something out of it.
Are you looking at the script at all when you're doing your first cut?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like I still feel like the script is a roadmap to beats, beats of a scene, or if the music's not doing it in this particular instance, is there something indicated in the script that says, well, this is the climactic moment, But I often feel like I have to also forget the script, because the script kind of doesn't matter as well at this stage. Like we're going to do so much rewriting in the post process anyways. But then it's really helpful to like get in there with John and say, okay, what do you think of this? And like, well, I love what you did, but there's this section that I really want to and we really want to work on together. Pacencia Fe is one of those places where I had a really great pass, but he also had very specific ideas about transitions from train to train. And so we had to finesse those together. Those jump cuts with Usnavi and the Bodega at the opening number, like we really had to work on those tirelessly together to, make those feel right and fun and, have a lot of bounce to it. 96,000, I had done things structurally, visually that he hadn't intended. And we kept putting it off to like do his version. And he was like, okay, let's now do let's do my version of structurally, like when to go underwater, for example. And he was like, oh yeah, it doesn't work that way. Let's go back to yours. So it's really a collaboration of these.
You're like, told you.
It's like, I don't know what to say. Or there's really big moves like Pacencia Fe was scripted to go in the first act of the movie, and right away we felt like it was not working. So much so.
And what's that number about for people?
So a Pacencia Fe is Abuela Claudia's, basically her telling of her story of her life, and it's basically it's told visually brilliantly by between Alice Brooks and Chris Scott and John's direction. They're basically frozen memories, illustrated with dance and spectacle, and it's arguably maybe the most beautiful musical number ever. And so, it was a possibility of us cutting it out of the movie because it wasn't working emotionally. They were like, why are we going to this person's story right now? Like it made sense from we introduce all the characters basically in the first half of the movie, but it didn't make sense for her, and that kind of number didn't make sense, especially before having that kind of number before 96,000 seemed like, what? We're like filled with joy and getting bounce, and we're feeling the heat of the summer. This has a whole other vibe. But I had told John, look, this number could really work well as a spoiler alert. Her life flashing before her eyes and her then passing away. And he was like, no,
that is
a
spoiler. That's okay. We'll give people a heads up.
give them a heads up, because I definitely do not want to spoil that. But what's so interesting about that is for months we didn't do that. And
I mean, that's a pretty major transformation.
Well, it also changes it from like being exposition in the beginning of the movie to filling out, right, the life of a person that you now care about.
Yeah, 100%. In the back of my mind, I was like, yeah, I think this can work. I don't know how. And, we had so much else to do that it wasn't like one of those experiments I could do on the side, which is what editors do all the time. They're like, I'm going to do it anyways while he's not looking. And, but there wasn't really time for that. And it was such a big move. I just wanted to be respectful of the process. Cut to, we had a friends and family screening. Pacencia Fe is still where it is. People are still unsure about it. It's actually not getting really great marks, in our friends and family screenings. And we're like, fuck, like, is this thing going to go? And, I think we were like having brunch with the producers, and John's was like, well, we can move this thing to maybe right before she passes away. And Myron had this idea months ago. And everyone's like just in shock. And I was like looking at John and like, did you really say what you just said? Like, and I was like, and I was like, kind of whispering, it's like, John, I don't know if it's going to work, And then everyone's like, that sounds really interesting. And then as soon as we left that brunch, we were like, okay, let's go try it.
What's interesting to me about that actual anecdote is that there's a level of politics to it that I think is fascinating, right? Like if you blindside people who, have decision-making power and maybe haven't warmed to the idea, and it's just like a big creative shift before they see in evidence that like there's something that needs to change, you can you just surprise them, right? But like if you're all working together to solve a problem that you all agree exists because of a screening, then all of a sudden that's when you can play that card of like, oh, well, we do have a solution. Let's try it out. Really fascinating.
There's a term, pick your battles, and it wasn't necessarily a battle. It just was like, it was something I knew we had to deal with. and I didn't know if I didn't know when we were going to deal with it, but we're going to have to deal with it at some point. But it's so much else to do.
Editor,
you know,
you're ahead of the curve. You're in the weeds on like what's working and what isn't, and other people have to kind of wait to see for a screening to happen before they actually know what needs to be tweaked in the first place. Yeah, that's why editors are so cranky. They're like, we know. I've been saying it for months.
I know.
Alone in this room.
Come on. And the reverse of that is we had Benny and the Dispatch out of the movie for months and months and months because we were like, there's too much Benny and Nina. There's too many character introductions. When are we going to get, we kept saying, like, we got to get to 96,000. It was the same thing with Crazy Rich Asians. Like, we got to get to Singapore as quickly as possible. Like, we have to get to 96,000. If we get to 96,000, we're going to have so much goodwill.
And 96,000, just for people who haven't seen the movie.
Oh, yeah. So 96,000 is our epic pool Busby Berkeley inspired
gotcha.
Number.
Just a showstopper number.
Yeah.
Just like you're in the movie now. Gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Correct. And because, again, we had, a majority of the numbers and the scenes before were introductions. There wasn't a lot of conflict. There wasn't a lot of, no pun intended, there wasn't a lot of fireworks as far as, like, the plot was concerned.
Mm-hmm. Or heightening.
This is going to be fun. So we had that number, Benny and the Dispatch, out for months. And we even screened for Lynn for the first time without that number. He's like, so where's Benny and the Dispatch? We're like, we're just trying out a few things. And it took a long time until it came back. And then when it came back, it was like, thank God it's back. Like, why did you guys, So there is a level of, like, you try some things politically, and then other things you're just like, I'm not ready. We can't. And you get it wrong. And sometimes you get it right. And it's okay to fail. And sometimes when you get the win and it makes the film better, that's great too.
Yeah. Well, I think John Chu right now is arguably like one of the best, if not the best, dance filmmakers, at least in the mainstream Hollywood. And I'm curious, I know you did Crazy Rich Asians with him and you said a couple TV pilots, but
Oren, did you know I worked with him as a wee teenager?
Yeah, he went to SC, right?
He went to SC, and I was a PA for him on his senior project, basically. And I very distinctly remember, because you would shoot on weekends, right? And it was a film that I'm sure is online now called Guaylo, and it was a musical. It was like, that guy, he was fully formed. He was like, oh, this is the golden boy. He's gonna have a career immediately. Everyone knew it. But I remember very distinctly, it's probably a month or two into college, calling my friends who were like hungover and asleep on a Saturday morning and being like, you guys, you gotta get down here. They've got a dolly. And I was so, I think of that moment all the time and cherish it because it was a Fisher dolly. I was so excited. We had probably 12 feet of track, It's great.
That's amazing.
Anyway,
I love that so much. I love that.
Yeah. My roommate ended up showing up and he is an extra and is very prominently featured, and I'm pretty jealous of it. Like, I think you can see my back in a few shots, but Tom Howard is like, there's a shot of his face.
Tom.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, so what I was going to ask is, you're working on this musical with this guy that is the top musical guy there is in the film world. Can you give us some advice on how to shoot musical numbers? They're famously hard. I don't think people realize how difficult it is to successfully film a bunch of people dancing and make it attractive, on camera. Like, is it just about wide lenses? Can you tell us a little bit about camera movement, about coverage, about
the
colors,
beat of the song? Yeah.
Like,
tracking emotion.
Yeah,
it's all
well, first of all, I think it's having a point of view and a vision about what it is versus I've worked on, I guess the Glee 3D concert movie is a good example where they just shot in a concert hall for 2 days and they just sprayed it down. They just shot the hell out of it. And
when you say spray it down, you mean that there's just a ton of angles and a ton of coverage and not a ton of intention behind it necessarily.
Correct.
Here's the pieces, put them together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's in the spirit of those type of movies where, Kevin Tantron is a very talented choreographer, filmmaker that I worked with in the past as well. So it's not like he was just like, calling it in. But they're supposed to make you feel like you're in that room. So it has more of a feel of a live concert or like a sporting event rather than whereas something
and
like
even Hamilton, the play is kind of like that.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, those live captures, are supposed to make you feel like how it is in the theater, and versus something that has a point of view and intention, a vision. There could be certain shots that like big gigantic crane shots at the end of In the Heights, where this is a place where we're going to see the whole community come together in this big gigantic mass. Or in the beginning, we're going to have aerial footage, but we're also going to have B cameras of just picking up little details of what this neighborhood is like. Or we're going to have, these sweeping camera moments in the bodega where we're following Usnavi along, but then, we can have these jump cuts, So I don't actually think there's any rules. Like we were honestly breaking rules. And sometimes we're just like right on the edge, seat of our pants, should we be doing this? Then we can have like a traditional Busby Berkeley aerial shot, about, 50 foot above the pool, which, evokes those, the golden age of cinema. But then you can have something super messy, cutting to a woman in dreads, like dancing her heart out in the shower, or this little girl dancing on top of a picnic table. Like it's sort of like combining documentary style with like really traditional Hollywood cinema. I love breaking rules. I love not saying you have to do it a certain way because I feel like it's just limits the tools in your toolbox, And I love having the first half of this movie feel very almost silly and kind of light on its feet. And then the second half gets kind of almost melodramatic. I love melodrama. I jokingly, like, anyone somebody says melodrama, was like, yes, I'm right here. Would you let me in, please? And it was a similar thing with Crazy Rich Asians, which is the first half.
How could you dare say that to me?
Yeah, I mean, sign me right up. I'm like explore and crush all the rules and genres. Yeah. And now that being said, Alice is very intentional in her beautiful lighting, and I mean every scene is just so gorgeously lit and precise. And she made a very distinctive looking hot summer movie, different than.
And she's the cinematographer.
Else. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I feel like, I remember when League of Extraordinary Dancers came out, LXD, like John Chu's, like, I think it was a web series.
It was a web series.
The best dancers, like and Step Up, those movies. I mean, the dancing in those movies is, you could just watch it all day, And I guess nowadays with TikToks, you can just sit there watching people dance all day and it's fun too. But I remember I've filmed some scenes where people dance. I shot this commercial where there's like a bunch of people dancing, and I'm like, I don't know. There's just something about the way he films dancing. It could be much better dancers in choreography, but that is just like drawing me in. And it feels like there's something about being on a wide angle lens, about the camera being part of the dance at times and
scope
not part of the dance at other.
I think there's definitely an interplay between the camera and the dancing. I think the traditional way is to basically hold that wide in like a proscenium sort of theatrical way and just let the dancing happen. But for us, there's so many, every single one of those dancers are expressing themselves like an actor. That is part of our language, So I want to feature somebody, and some of those people are doing the choreography exactly the way Chris Scott is intended, and some people are freestyling, And so I think that John gives permission for both, and I think that's why, and he understands dance, he understands dancers. So it's, for somebody who doesn't really is that technically correct? I'm just sort of reacting to it emotionally. And so there may be a B or C camera, like Carnival, DeBarro, they shot in one day, that whole number. And it was like a lot of cameras, catching little almost kind of like messy documentary style, moments to cut to. And then they would have these really sort of epic shots, crane shots, dolly shots. They had these amazing pans between the sections of the different dancers that basically feature different countries of dance, and anyways, there's so many different styles of shooting. Unless, we had aerial footage, we had, which was originally like, Google map images, and it was just like, okay, there's going to be the GW bridge. See it? It doesn't look amazing. And, we used stock footage, and that then turned into cool dolly shots or, cool little handheld pieces. And anyways, it's
the friends and family screening. They're like, what is iStock? What's Pond 5? What does that mean?
It's funny because we had so many of our friends and family footage with that stock footage. It wasn't until I think after like our second preview that we finally got to shoot that community chorus properly. So I was just like, we have to get the stock footage clean. Like, it can't have water.
Sure.
It can't have watermarks.
It's a bummer. Yeah. Spend the $65. But Myron, what's interesting to me, what you're helping me realize is that I feel like if you look at musicals specifically throughout film history, it started like Busby Berkeley. It was like the goal of that was to treat people like almost like props. They needed to be identical. They needed to be in lockstep with one another. You can use a mirror to amplify them and all that stuff. And it was about the design en masse, right? And then I feel like in the 90s, give or take, there was this shift into like, what if regular people were the dancers? I think of like When Everyone Says I Love You, that old Woody Allen movie, and La La Land, I think, is in this tradition as well of just like, you're good at dancing. You practice. There's great choreography, but like, it's okay if Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone aren't incredibly talented dancers. They're going to make up for it in charisma, and there's a charm to that. But what this movie, it sounds like, is kind of doing is like the combination of, eclectic, diverse, real world style casting with a Hollywood golden era sort of approach to it as well. So you can cut between verite that's rough and ready, and then also get the incredible spectacle of the aerial footage or the incredible crane shot. And the dancing is immaculate. And that is an interesting evolution and very exciting to me. I think.
Yeah, I don't want to go too much into the critics, but for the people who don't like the cutting of the movie, they're just like, well, I wish you'd just hold on the wides. It's like, well, that's not what this movie is. It's about the messiness. I'm sorry, it just is. Like, if you don't like that, you think I'm cutting it up too much. Like, it's just not what the movie is. And it's about the little details. It's literally what the trailer said. It's the little details in order for us to not feel invisible. So I love the fact that we highlight the messiness, highlight each and every dancer's expressive flair, and it's what makes the film. I think, and I also think that's why people who see John's work connect to it so deeply.
Yeah, without a doubt. On an editing front, I didn't realize there was the criticism about it being too cutty or something like that. That seems crazy to me. But knowing, you said you love to like live in the wide. When you see those big crane shots, you see those big wides, and in the raw footage, everyone is always blown away. That's the coolest shot. So it's a real conscious decision that like you really process every time you cut out of that footage because it means something to you. The decision to cut from the cool big wide shot, you do it with intention and purpose. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Whatever, critics. It hurts to cut, is what I'm saying. I'm going to say it for you.
Thank you. No, it's look. I feel very lucky for what I do. I just like, but there's an intent. There's an intention to everything that we're doing. We're not just cutting like there's some numbers like 96,000, which is a bit more cutty, and you could say arguably it's more like a music video. But that wasn't the intention at all. Like, so we're not doing things in a random way just to cut between shots. We're highlighting details and sometimes protecting our actors and doing things that we do that will heighten the the performance.
The heights.
In the heightens. Yeah, and I assume like the people that are probably critical about cutting away from the white shot are the people that are madly in love with the stage show, that maybe are just looking to see the stage show film,
or madly in love with that specific, sort of shooting style. That seeing Fred Astaire like dance across this soundstage and just holding on them. There's magic to that for sure. But we're also competing with a generation of people who are basically living on TikTok, and we're trying to connect to those people as well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned TikTok. My wife is on like a tear of like old Hollywood, like Instagram and TikTok, and they'll speed those dances up. It drives me nuts. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, you just can't fit those long oneers." You're just like, oh my God. It's still charming though. So.
I know we have to wrap up soon, but I just wanted to just quickly ask you about your philosophy about music outside of musicals. It's something I'm always curious about. When you start cutting a movie, do you have any rules that you like to start with in terms of what scene gets music, what scene doesn't get music? Like, do you use temp music? How do you work with music in general as an editor? I'm curious.
I try to wait as long as possible before I put a single note in, because I feel like it's a crutch, and it generally will it'll affect the rhythm of things. So it's been this sort of challenge against my own sort of my lazy self, where I'm just like, if I just put music in there, this scene's gonna work, and because just
in the score.
Yeah, exactly. You can just really cheat something. And so more and more I wait really like the last, like when I'm working in television specifically, you have to put together those cuts very quickly and those assemblies together. And I don't even connect the scenes to each other, let alone, put any music or sound effects. I wait really late in the process before I start doing it. And
like even for the transitions from scene to scene, you don't do those?
No.
Oh, how come?
Because again, I think it's something that's going to indicate, it's going to smooth over that transition and make it work, versus like something that should be working by itself. Like for example, oftentimes I'll even turn off all the sound to like even the dialogue just to watch it visually. Sometimes I would even do that in the Heights. Like I was just like,
that's how I cut the podcast actually. sorry. I'm sorry. I had a copy, Myron.
That's a hat trick.
Yeah.
Sorry,
you were saying something valuable. You were saying something important.
I'm just saying that I try not to use things, which I basically call it icing on the cake, to basically smooth over something that should work on its own. Now, at the end of the day, if I still need a musical transition to like, and TV specifically, it's like, it's all about those musical transitions. They just, where's our button, to get to the next place. But it's more like, anyways, long story short, I try to wait as long as possible. Try not to trick things out until I feel like the performance works. It works visually, and I tell young editors all the time, don't do it. Like, I know you want to do it. I want to do it. I want to do it. I want to do all that. And then they'll say, I was like, turn off all that music, And oftentimes when I work with really great directors and I've tricked something out on my, assembly to give to them, they'll say, turn off all the music. It's like, okay, I know exactly why you're asking me to do that.
That's really interesting. Oren, you were going to say the same thing that I'm thinking, I think.
That I always put music in the beginning, and now I feel like a real idiot.
Yeah. And the reason...
Yeah, I mean, the music does help set a tone sometimes that you can use as an editor, but... I did a feature, and one of the things that the composer and the sound designer and I would talk about is how there's this interplay between action in the film, the sound that we hear, and the music. And sometimes when you cut a whole movie, which is what we did with temp music or whatever, and then our composer comes in, we haven't left him room in the cut to have that moment of musicality that is helping, tell the story or turn the story upside down or whatever.
I used to do completely the opposite thing. I used to just trick everything out. And, I've cut things like Garden State or Nick and Orson playlist that's like wall to wall, like needle drops, And so I did it even a bit more back in those days, where it was just like, it's all about the soundtrack. But I've just learned that I'm getting better by, just as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, by resisting my own urge.
Yeah, no, I love that. I guess what I was just thinking through is that oftentimes when I'm going to show, especially like in a commercial or something with a tighter turnaround in particular, or where there are like other creative stakeholders you kind of have to answer to as a director, I'm always apprehensive of letting them use their imaginations. Do you know what I mean? If they're like, oh, shouldn't there be music here? And I know it's a little bit of apples and oranges when you're talking about a feature film versus a 30-second commercial. But I would always be like, I want everything in this cut before we send it to anybody, because I want them to know exactly what I'm thinking. But it's interesting because what you're saying is that before doing that, make sure it works. It can be a Band-Aid or covering up something, an inadequacy that you're not seeing because there's something there to kind of mask it.
There's a term, that you guys probably know, like putting lipstick on a pig.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's
we get a lot of pigs in the commercial business, buddy. Yeah.
But I've literally saved scenes by just keep working the footage, working it tirelessly, creating performances and moments out of nothing, because I was patient with the process. And generally, when I went too soon, too fast, and all that extra stuff, all that icing, they generally they didn't serve their potential. Yeah,
that makes complete sense. I love
also,
that.
Myron's relationship with the people he's showing the cut to, right? Producers, directors, whoever, is different than when we are cutting a commercial and we want to show it to a client or an agency, and we want them to think like, oh, we hired the right person, I think as an editor, it's more like, okay, here's a starting point for us to have discussions about and see what's working and what's not working. As a director, you're just like, of a commercial, you just want the people that gave you the money to do it to like be like, woo, this is sick,
Yeah, so you're servicing, different clients. And that being said about my process, John does like to trick things out very easily. Like, he's obsessed with sound design. Like, he prefers me to get really deep with the sound design. And on this film, I actually cut for the first time. I cut in 5.1 in my edit bay. And I did that because I knew he liked to trick things out, having worked with him on, the last few things. And I was really hesitant to do it as a technical challenge, because like, I'm already cutting a goddamn gigantic musical. I'm also going to teach myself how to do 5.1. And
you're cutting an Avid, right? Just to confirm.
That's correct. Cutting in 5.1 really gave me the toys to approximate what it felt like to see and hear this thing in a theater. And so I could create chaos with my assistants, like cutting up sound design, and I could mix it a certain way, or I could add sound design, like that whole like chaotic scene in Blackout with all the fireworks. I was like, I need us to make this thing so fucking loud and chaotic, because when we go into something like Pacincia Faye, it's going to get so quiet. And when she passes away, we actually, I take out all the sound out of the entire, there's no sound, there's not even tone at that moment. And I did that in the edit in order just to sketch it out. So I do a lot of that work very early in the process, knowing that it's icing on the cake, but I also know that John really digs that stuff.
Yeah, you don't serve John a naked cake.
I don't.
You make sure the cake is good first, and then you put the icing on it.
Even that scene, there was like a real simple scene with Mark Anthony and Anthony Ramos, and he's just watching baseball, and there was like a fan there. It's like a hot day, and you could just hear the subway. So we created all these like really, just almost. Just texture, really. But really early on in the assembly process, I was putting this stuff in, and I was like, I just loved it so much, being part of like trying to figure out that scene, because it's very awkward, it's very hot, it's like I feel like I've stepped into that scene from all those elements.
It's great. Well, thanks, Myron. This has been awesome. We could literally do an entire episode with you on pretty much every single movie. Like I could just ask you about editing Girls probably for like 5 hours. But are you allowed to tell us what you're working on next? What you're
Well, I'm currently working on Tick Tick Boom with Lin-Manuel Miranda now.
Ooh,
So cool. Congratulations.
and he's
Very
directing.
Yes, he is. This is his directorial debut, and it's going really well. And the trailer just dropped. Teaser trailer just dropped a few days ago, and
Does that mean he thought you did a good job on In the Heights?
I think so. It was so funny because I'm actually taking over for another editor. There's an amazing editor named Andy Weisblum who cuts Darren Aronofsky's films and Wes Anderson's films.
Never heard of him.
Andy did an incredible job just getting it up on its feet, and but COVID had messed up his schedule. So Darren had a new movie, and so John Chu called me up and said, "Did you take that job?" I was like, "No, I didn't take that other film job." I was like, "Okay, good, because Lynn's going to call you." I was like, "Really? Lynn's going to call me?" It's like, and he joking like, "Yeah, I think he did an okay job on In the Heights." So.
Man, that's a pretty good company you're hanging out with.
I mean, I'm literally this kid from Oceanside, California, raised by
surfers,
plumber, and raised by dolphins. I was gonna say, and raised by middle class, like not artistic type. Although my dad was artistic, he was he was a plumber by trade. And to think that I'm now here talking to you guys after, it's a literally pinch myself moment,
Yeah, I mean, being on Just Shoot It is the honor of a lifetime.
Yeah, it's the pinnacle. It's the Oscars of West Coast podcasts.
No, because I know that you both are wizards and you're really fucking funny. So you guys,
Thank
you guys.
We did go to 4 years of wizarding school. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, are you cool to hang out with us for a minute for our unpaid endorsement section?
Sure, absolutely.
Unpaid endorsements. So my unpaid endorsement actually is our good pals at Vanishing Angle, which is a production company that made movies like Thunder Road and Werewolves Within, which is coming out this summer, I believe, with our pal Josh Rubin. Anyway, good buddies. A lot of them have been on the show. But they did a South by Southwest panel for 2021, virtual panel that is really great. Talks just about not only their approach, but the nature of making independent film with your friends in your backyard in 2021. So I think it kind of gives you a good overview of their philosophies specifically, but also just like kind of independent film at large, which is pretty nice. And because things are shifting and changing, I think up-to-date information on the business models and what to aspire to or how to aspire to something specifically, I think is pretty valuable. So their South by Southwest panel is up on the South by Southwest YouTube. And do yourself a favor, browse through all the other stuff. It's pretty rad. You can basically feel like you attended all of the panels at South by Southwest for free on YouTube without having to go to Austin. So
is it with video or
with video? Yeah. It's a Zoom. They're all Zooms basically. Yeah. So it's pretty great. Grab yourself a breakfast taco and you're basically there. So that is my unpaid endorsement. Mr. Myron, what you got, buddy?
Yeah. So this T-shirt, actually, one of our actors is wearing this T-shirt in the movie, Anthony Ramos, during Carnival de Barrio, and it's designed by this guy named Tony Peralta. And Tony Peralta lives in Washington Heights, and he has a website called peraltaproject.com. And he is this amazing Washington Heights Dominican artist, designer. And as soon as I started seeing his stuff, I was just I have to get all of it. But I think it feels very New York, but also very, his style, which is, a little bit street, a little bit just punk. This is sort of inspired with the In the Heights logo that you see. I've been seeing all over all the advertisements. So anyways, I just wanted to give him a shout out because my brother-in-law was like, where did you get that shirt? I was like, Tony Peralta, like he's amazing. And anyways, I just think he's an incredible designer and wanted spread the word.
Yeah, I'm checking out his site. It's awesome. Awesome stuff on here. Well, cool. So my endorsement is, it's kind of an obvious one, but I'm just doing it anyway because I bought a new hard drive today on Amazon, 5 terabyte hard drive, because I have like 7 hard drives on my desk just for my kind of day-to-day stuff. I have a hard drive that has everything I've ever directed. That's like my director's reel hard drive. And I have a hard drive with all the sound effects, like 600 gigs of sound effects. And then I have like another hard drive that has, templates and fonts. And I have one that has a bunch of 3D stuff. And I just have all these hard drives. And I love getting these like lacy rugged drives. And this is you can get a 5 terabyte drive for like $150. You can get a Western Digital for like $90 or whatever. But I like these rugged ones because I can throw them in my backpack. And basically, I just put this in my backpack anywhere where I go and work on any project I work on. And I always have like high quality copies of everything I've ever made. If I need to show someone something or rip something, I have like my whole sound effects library. I have all my graphics, my stock footage, my action essentials, all that stuff. And I'm excited that I'm going to put it all on one drive so I can carry it around. And maybe, Matt, I can even give you my old sound effects drive. So,
I wouldn't mind your sound effects drive.
Could I just add a little story to that? When I started out as an assistant editor, and they created this thing called Avid, and they would have drives as big as like 3 hardcover books stacked on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
those
we'd have to
encyclopedia.
Yeah. And they would
like
be so heavy,
block.
and those would be 9 gigabytes. 9 gigabytes. And
you'll never need more space, man.
Totally. It was just like, you could fit a whole film on 20 of these.
Yeah.
And we would just I'd also rebuild Avids because, part of being an assistant editor back then was like, you have to build the whole system too. And then we'd like, I gotta do it. I gotta daisy chain all these drives. And it's just like, just that was the hard part of being an assistant back. That and working night shifts, all night. Because you'd have to digitize footage and watch the tape deck rewind and wind back up and watch your life go before your eyes.
Yeah, well, awesome. It seems to have worked for you.
Yeah, it worked out okay.
Yeah, so that's good training grounds, carrying gigantic drives.
Yeah, but it's just, I think connecting, like taking all your most important, most used tools and putting them in one place is always smart. And so I'm refreshing that for myself.
I feel like Questlove just carries around like a couple terabytes of music with him in a suitcase at all times. I feel like I saw that in a documentary. So.
I can easily see that. Like, need someone to DJ? Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Myron, if people want to find out more about you and what you're working on, are you on social media? How do people keep track of you?
I'm on Instagram and Twitter and
Myron at Myron Kerstein?
Yeah, I think.
MIKFLIKS.
Yes, that's my Instagram. But Twitter is at Myron Kerstein.
Awesome, man. Well, if you want to learn more about the things that we talked about, you can go to justshootitpod.com. We'll have links to plenty of the stuff that we talked about over this episode. And you can follow us across all social media at justshootitpod. You can email us at justshootitpod@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments, or give us a call, leave us a voicemail at 262-SHOOT-1. It's a real treat to hear your voice. We really love that. And you can follow me across all social media at Mr. madeMatt.
And I'm on Twitter at SmiteyPyleg. I'm on Instagram at OKaplan. And this episode was edited by Sarah Weirda. Our social media maestro is Derek Aiello. We have some consulting producing from Ali Kornfeld, and the music you're listening to is from the Free Music Archive and the artist Jazar, and we'll catch you all next week. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Myron.